Hi guys, this is Grandmaster Levan Aroshidze, and finally I got some time to work also for my own web page too, chess ideas, and I hope I will be able to offer to you some high quality material, some interesting analysis, to make some surprises time after time, and I hope you will like my work. So let's start. Today we are going to talk about one of the most beautiful tournaments. Uh, Women European Championship that's going on right now in Georgia. They already played, I guess, 6 rounds. There were very interesting battles, a lot of surprises, and I have chosen 3 games, and we are going to review them, opening part and later stage battles. Well, interesting is that till today the leader was player from Romania, Mihaela Sandu. Uh, but today she lost against the Batsiashvili. Well, also interesting point is that it was a delay in a live broadcast for the game Sandu Batsiashvili, and well, why it happened? Probably organizers has some suspicions um, about external help for the Sandu, maybe some cheating, I don't know, whatever. Um, or it was just a prophylaxis to make sure that it doesn't happening, to avoid this kind of problems. I don't know. However, I checked 2 last games of Sandu, and well, personal my opinion is that there is no any doubt, no cheating, nothing. I did not see any improvement for that. And the first game that we are going to analyze is exactly the Sandu's game that she won against the Javashvili just yesterday. Okay, let's go then. My Sicilian, I love this opening system, and Lela decided to go for a6. Javashvili is playing with black, Sandu is with white. Okay, Paulsen. Paulsen is a little bit, in my opinion, more double-edged than, for example, Taimanov that starts with the knight c6 move. Because with the Paulsen, black doesn't enter into the contact with the knight d4. So black wants to, first develop the pieces. Maybe knight will go even on d7. So it means that bishop on b7 will have this open diagonal. Rook will have more open file, semi-open file, knight on c6 will not close it. And this knight has quite flexible squares. It's quite flexible and has access to the interesting squares from d7. For example, it could go on c5, it could go on b6, then c4. So it's a really very nice and interesting opening system. So a6, knight c3. Of course, it's possible to play also for c4, Maroczy structure. But Sandu decided to go for this classical line and b5. Well, I think here our tastes with Javashvili are different. When I play these type of positions with black, I normally try to avoid this quick b5. Well, anyway, b5 is one of the main lines, but personally I don't like it because I think it's a little bit it's limiting black's options. What I mean, I don't have a development and already I'm pushing the pawns on the queen side. So it means that white has an additional ideas, not only attack on the king side or in the center, but at some point white could think about a4 and to destroy my activity, my pawn chain on the queen side. That really bothers me a lot. So first I try to develop the king side, place the queen on c7, knight f6, d6, and later try to play already b5 and stuff like this. But okay, let's follow to the Javashvili's game. She played b5, bishop d3, d6, castle, and knight f6. So the next move of Sandu, actually, I don't really like it. Okay, there are some games with this move, but definitely it's not the main line here. So she just continues this typical kingside activity and central activity with f4. That's quite logical. But I think much more uh, dangerous for black would be if she would start play on the queen side. That's what I was talking about, right? I want to explore the queen side, destroy this some kind of activity, and demonstrate that it was a premature. Because, come on, a lot of black pieces are in the last rank, right? So, in one of the latest games, Volokitin with white played very interesting new idea, starting with move b4. So it's like fixing the queen side, and for example, after bishop e7, a4, pawn takes, knight takes, castle, c4, well, first f3 also possible, queen c7, c4, knight d7, bishop e3. We get some kind of hedgehog, but uh, semi-destroyed hedgehog, because I don't have this pawn b6. So I feel a little bit, as I mentioned before, this is a limited hedgehog. So maybe black has a quite playable position, but it's not in my taste. I don't really like it. White has a slightly better position, and I don't see this typical Sicilian activity, this dynamic play. So that's why I don't play b5. Also, together with this b4 move, maybe even much more dangerous is the main continuation, immediately a4. So now what to do? b4, knight a2, and d5. There were mainly two jumps here with the knight, on f5 or on a f3. To be honest, I don't know which I like more. Maybe knight f3 is more dangerous, but also knight f5 can offer some initiative to white. So white is the player who always keep going to pressure. So I would feel uncomfortable with this position with black. For example, knight c6, bishop g5, d5, queen e2. You know, he already creates some threats, some pins, pressures the center, while I still have the king here and still have to develop this bishop f8 to castle. We are following to the game Delchev Georgiou, I think. Queen a5 was played in the game. Logical maneuver, knight goes to b3, queen b6, knight b3, and well, I'm not very sure about the next move of Georgiou, but it doesn't change the case of the game, right? White pressures. Black in the game played queen b7, and now really very beautiful combination, bishop b5. When we have development advantage, we have to, well, we don't have to, but we may sacrifice some little material to open the position and let our pieces to use the activity. And take the full advantage of undeveloped opponent's position. So pawn takes, rook takes, knight d8, now queen e5 check. And well, here Georgiou played bishop b7, and after rook e1, black is lost simply. Everything is stuck here and pin on e file. After king f8, b6, h6, take, queen c7, he resigned. Maybe slightly better is queen e7 here, but anyway, also after queen g3, this queen blocks the whole king side, and white keeps attacking. I believe he will win this position. And another alternative, as we mentioned after e5, is just knight f3. And here also white keeps very unpleasant pressure. For example, when I was checking the material on this line, I like to rematch the game of Kusainov that he played with white against Rasulov, two Azerbaijani grandmasters. Knight c6, bishop d2, rook b8, queen e2, queen c7. Well, as I understand so far, it's impossible to take on a6. Well, it's possible, but after exchange, black will also take on e4. Rook c1, white is preparing c3. So that's the point of the queenside attack. It looked like that black needs to show activity there, but due to development problems, white explores now c-file and could create very nasty pressure on the c-file. So a5 was played in the game, and now probably very surprising move c3. After first look, it seems that b3 simply wins the knight. But the key idea is that knight b4 is possible. And now after pawn takes, black pawns are just finishing the game. And again, development. Yes, black is a piece up, but pieces are not playing. Queen b7, b5, a5, bishop d7, a6, bishop e3. Pawns are keep rolling. So in the game, Rasulov actually didn't take the knight. He played just knight a7, and even drew the game. But for example, after bishop e3, rook a8, knight e5, white would have near almost decisive advantage, I think, near to decisive, because pawn b3 is going to be lost. Knight d2, if necessary, rook a3, so I have a healthy extra pawn. So that's why I don't like to play early b5. But okay, after the move of the Sandu, she delays the queenside attack, and now everything is okay because Lela played bishop b7, and in case of a5, it already can be answered with the b4, attacking the knight, and then e4 starts hanging. So now everything goes very well and very nice for black. Queen f3, knight e7, king h1. We see all typical moves, and here Lela played bishop e7. I believe this is the number one option in this position. However, I would like to show you one additional idea that I like to use in my games when it's possible. G6. Because this is a very good prophylaxis, first of all, against the white's attack on the king side, against this bishop. And for example, at some point after we will finish development, for example, bishop g7 castle, black already starts to think about central strikes like e5. So it's highly important to have under control f5 square to avoid knight f5 jump. So as we see, g6 is really very useful move. And sometimes after bishop e7 castle, to make sure that black king is safe, black starts this maneuver, rook e8, bishop f8, and maybe later g6, bishop d7. So in this case, of course, it's very interesting to play g6 immediately. Of course, we everybody know the famous game Karpov against Kasparov in the match. When in the last game of the match, when Kasparov won his Scheveningen variation, and he demonstrated this maneuver of putting bishop on d7 to make sure that his king will be safe. So okay, g6 is very decent alternative to bishop e7. Okay, Lela wants to develop pieces very quickly. Sandu makes this prophylaxis to avoid b4 ideas at some point. Very logical. And knight c5. Okay, knight c5 is also absolutely acceptable move. Probably Lela was fearing that if she will make a castle here, possibly queen h3 could be a threat, and later e5, and some problems can appear on h7. So I don't know. Maybe she even did not calculate quite deeply these variations and just played knight c5. Okay, it's acceptable, but I would not hurry. I wouldn't rush with this knight c5, because if we will show some cold-blooding reactions after queen h3 now, knight c5 is very strong. So actually e5 give nothing. Just if he plays something like e5, okay, we can take it here. Pawn takes, and now I'm taking the bishop, so nothing happens. There is no checkmate there. If black takes on f6, bishop takes, and knight is hanging here, and well, knight is hanging here anyway. So black has a very nice position. So there was not a reason to fear for queen h3 ideas. Okay, maybe white could play something like bishop d2. First, she would plan rook e1 and then queen h3. Okay, possible. But rook c8, rook e1, and knight c5 now. Finally, to keep watching this bishop to make sure that no checkmate will appear at some point. And black has a very good position. So knight c5 is good, but I would castle first. It's more flexible. Now, b4. This is a typical reaction. White forced to take on d3, and now she lost the bishop, important attacking piece, but when pawn c2 goes to the d3 square, now black's pressure on e4 slows down or simply disappears. So it also has some positive points. However, if black has a good development, there is no quick entrance on c-file or initiative, we feel quite comfortable. Here Lela made a castle, and I think this is again a little bit mechanical move, because after castle, white may play bishop e3, and when black will play rook c8, that obviously is a logical move, rook c1 is coming, right? So black could be a little bit trickier. First, they could start with the rook c8 before bishop went to the e3 when rook c8 is already possible. And now white is forced to make, instead of bishop e3, that obviously is the best square for the bishop, now bishop b2 or bishop d2, and then castle. So it would be slightly better for black. However, it's not a criminal to make a castle. It's not a crime. So castle, and I was really waiting here to see bishop e3 move, because this is the square for the bishop. On b2, well, it looks like that, okay, it's interesting diagonal, but you have to remove a lot of pieces from this diagonal to open it for the bishop, actually. And it takes a lot of time. So more thematic here, thematic is bishop e3, not bishop on b2. So now, black played rook c8. I would be very happy to have this position with black. Knight b3, knight e7, knight a5. Well, I don't like this move. It seems like, generally, I don't like this maneuver. Knight goes to a5 looks like that. Wow, it's interesting square attacking the bishop, but in truth, after the bishop a8, knight is doing nothing here in the corner, and even it was not possible to exchange for the bishop. Bishop cuts out the knight and keeps pressuring there. So Tarash would be crazy now. For example, if he would see this maneuver, knight going to the corner, he would become very angry. So everything goes very good for black, as we see. And well, what is in the black's plan here? Bishop f6 probably, and later she could already start thinking about some central strikes probably. Maybe e5, or okay, black has such a good position that we can avoid even central strike. e5 normally, bishop f6, g6 and e5 is very effective when when the white knight still stands on d4. But now maybe even just the bishop e3, queen b6, rook c7, rook c8, it would be very promising position for black. So I understand that Mihaela realizes that there are some problems, and she pushes d4 to change a little bit the structure. But still, black has a very good position. Javashvili immediately uses the weakness of c4 square, and actually these central pawns doesn't make any damage to my position. Actually, they are more under the pressure after bishop f6 especially. So d5. I have to mention that Lela was playing this game just perfectly until some moment. Now she doesn't make any case to this d5, and she just continues bishop f6, improving the pressure of the position. Pawn takes, rook d1, queen e7, with a clear advantage for black. And now after rook e1, it was a critical moment when finally black could get a decisive advantage. And it was possible to achieve just with a little simple move, bishop e5, using the pin and forcing white to play g3. Okay, after g3, when white doesn't have a white squared bishop, and I have this monster here on a8, I think rest is just a technique. Especially that Sandu was suffering a little bit with the time trouble. Okay, instead of this, Jawakshvili played knight c4, knight takes, rook takes, that's also good, rook d3. And here again, that was a moment when bishop e5, provoking g3, would give huge advantage to black. But I don't know what was the reason. Lela or didn't see or ignored just this idea, and she goes to pressure on the open c file, knight d1. And now again, one more mistake. Well, little mistake, but with little mistakes, black's initiative, black's advantage step by step is disappearing. Very powerful strike would be here d5, using these geometrical points. Oops, queen f4, rook f4, this pressure. Now e4 is also under the attack, so black would still have near to decisive advantage. But somehow, after bishop b2 and rook c2, black slows down the pressure, exchanges the pieces, and white can at least look for the future bravely now. Knight d1, of course, black has some advantage still. d5, queen g4, pawn takes e4, queen takes e6, king h8, rook d6. Rook c1. Maybe rook c6 was also interesting, trying to exchange this active rook. But okay, black also has its own active rook. So h3, and now h6 is a mistake already, serious mistake. Okay, it's starting from, I don't know, move number 22, I think, till now, up to now, the last 8 moves, black made a little bit, the slow passive moves, and probably 80% of the advantage was lost. Again, instead of h6, I would recommend something like bishop c6 with the idea to play rook e8 and support the pass pawn, because knight is under the pin. So this blocking idea doesn't work so far. So after h6, queen e5, king h7, to avoid this tactical threat, rook takes h6, king h2, and now black mates probably the key mistake of the game, queen b7. I was trying to understand what was the reason. Maybe, okay, I understand that Lela wants to have this type of ideas and finally use the pressure on this long diagonal, but I have a feeling that she thought that it's impossible to block this pawn. Maybe she thought that as knight is pinned, so knight e3 is not possible. So in this case, queen b7 could be a very unpleasant potential threat for the future. But the matter is that rook can go to e3 as knight is protected by another rook, and it's just a great maneuver on the third rank. Rook will protect g2 pawn, start attack against the black king, and later knight can also go to e3. So suddenly white relocates his pieces perfectly and takes the advantage. From the, I don't know, move like 14 till now, black were the dominating side, but the last mistakes absolutely changes the evolution of the game. Well, instead of bishop b7, I could recommend, for example, rook d8, because this is really a strong rook and creates, together with the queen, some problems. However, I cannot guarantee that black has some serious mistake here, because after these exchanges, even this is not a threat, because there is always a perpetual checks. So it's about balanced equality already here. But bishop b7, and black is suffering now. Rook e3, rook c7, rook g3, And probably it was, already emotionally very hard for Lela to continue playing this game, because suddenly it absolutely changed for 180 grads. So um, probably she should play here rook f7. And in order, what is the idea of rook f7? If now white will play something like queen h5, now rook f6 to close this pressure here. Well, anyway, after rook f7, knight e3, I believe white has a very comfortable advantage already. In the game, it was played rook e7, but after queen h5, suddenly black is already lost, because it's difficult to avoid kingside attack and threats. Now the threat is rook takes h6, pawn takes h6, queen g6 check, king h8, queen h6 check, rook h7, and queen takes the rook, checkmating. So it's impossible to defend this position. King g8, rook h6, and black resign. Well, quite a pity loss, because objectively black were just black had a perfect position during almost all in all parts of the game. But this happens, few mistakes, and everything has changed. So after that, Sandu became a leader, and I hope in the next video I will be able to check the game Sandu Batsiashvili and make a little analysis, but not today. Now, the next game. Next game we have very interesting battle between two talented Georgian girls. Khotinashvili played against Arabidze, and it was some kind of reti, then it transposed to the some Benoni with different colors. So d4, g3, knight c6, bishop g2, e5, d3, bishop b4 check. Sometimes black give this check, sometimes they don't. The idea of this check is that black wants to force knight d2 move, and now after a5 castle, bravely and safely develop this knight. The point is that black avoided this possible pin and exchange on f6. Okay, this is not obligated to do, but I think it's good. Rook b1, bishop e7, knight e1. This typical Benoni maneuver, knight goes to c2, and to support later b4 strike. But to be honest, I never liked this structure for white or for black, doesn't matter. Difference from the modern Benoni is that the pawns are at the board, so white don't have attack and pressure over the center or the e-file. So it limits a lot, limits very much white's potential activity, dynamical possibilities. So a4, knight c2, and rook e8. Okay, now white's play is quite restricted, as we mentioned. Of course, b4 is possible, but then after a takes b3, this pawn chain on the queen side will become slightly ugly. B4 anyway was played because there's no other logical ways to improve white's position. Pawn takes, knight takes, and simply h6. Well, good prophylaxis. Maybe bishop g5 was not a threat, but anyway, this is a good move. And here, Khotinashvili decided to break through in the center. I don't know, a little bit double-edged decision, maybe not the best one. However, I don't see what to recommend any comfortable ideas to white. For example, maybe bishop d2 with the idea of playing bishop b4 could be interesting. But even if black will simply play bishop d6, here exchanges and go for c6 to limit the white's bishop, then possibly bishop g4, queen d7, black is just fine there. So white complicates the situation, take, pawn takes, and here Arabidze could play slightly more trickier. She made e4. Okay, she plays e4, and after d4 goes to pressure these pawns. But if she would start with bishop g4, she would force the queen to go to d2 square, because queen needs to keep protecting this pawn. And now e4, d4, rook a4, we could get almost similar position, but white doesn't have this option to go back with the knight, support pawn c4, and pressure pawn e4. So it was a little trickier, slightly smarter than the immediate e4. But okay, it's absolutely acceptable. d4, knight a4, knight e2, bishop g4, queen e1. It's really a crazy position, very hard to make concrete analysis. But the problem for white was that also there was a time trouble coming. b6, rook f2, queen d7. Okay, we can just continue watching this complicated game. And now, this is another interesting position. I don't know why, but Black here decided to play bishop e6. Well, if Khotanashvili was in the time trouble, Arabidze had enough time to think about this position, so probably she was able to find a better continuation, just coming back with the bishop. I thought that maybe this is the prophylaxis against knight d5 or bishop d5 too. Okay, it's understandable. I can understand it. But in truth, Black had a better continuation. Instead of going back and making prophylaxis, just to continue attacking with bishop g5. And now bishop d5 is simply a bad move because of just rook takes c1, rook takes c1, and bishop e3. And if Black plays knight d5, now bishop e6 is good, because knight will not stand long on d5 square, definitely. Knight has to go back to f4, and Black is ready to exchange one of these beauty bishops, because automatically another bishop also will be exchanged. Well, I don't believe that white can just leave this diagonal to the black bishop. So it means that Black is able to fix those pawns, weaken the king, so position would be very promising for Black. e4 of course doesn't work, that's the key, because bishop can take it here, check, recovering the piece, and with two extra pawns. So bishop e6 is the move that actually almost lost all the advantage. Well, I would say that it's already lost the advantage. But here probably what happened, as time trouble was coming, Khotanashvili could not evaluate the results of typical sacrifice on f6. But I think if Petrosian would be playing this position with white, he would sacrifice even without thinking, just intuitionally. It's just his type of sacrifice, right? And just count on long-term compensation due to weakened king's position. This was the best option. Pawn takes, and just simply bishop b2. White has a very good compensation. It's such a good compensation, powerful initiative, that maybe the best choice what Black could do here is simply give back the exchange and go to trade some pieces to limit White's possible attack on the king side. But Khotanashvili played d5, that's it's weaker than rook takes f6, bishop g4, and here too I believe that this was the most optimal continuation for white. But suddenly, I don't know, Bella didn't want to sacrifice anything in this game, so she played knight c6, and now a crazy blitz game is starting. So it even makes no sense to make some serious analysis here, because when you have a few minutes at the clock, it's very difficult to calculate something or to give just advice. Finally, after a few moves, we came to this position. It was move number 39 now. It's White's turn to play. And Khotanashvili had a very nice possibility to fix a draw, to make equality, to fix equality. Because actually, to be honest, during all the game, Arabidze had advantage and was pressuring. Now, queen takes e4 was the move that would guarantee equality to white. Bishop takes h2, king takes, queen takes, and just rook f7. And it's impossible to avoid rook takes g7, and then probably black will be forced to give perpetual checks because of threats of well, open checks and stuff like this. For example, knight d5, queen takes d5, rook takes g7, and or perpetual checks or some kind of, well, but perpetual checks, there are no perpetual checks. Queen a2, and I can play king g3, right? Yeah. Okay, c5 and bishop f6. Well, something like this. And okay, white also can make perpetual check. Rook takes g6 and then rook g7. Well, however, it's equality in all kind of positions. Maybe queen d4 is the better try for black. Pawn takes, king takes, but this pawn endgame is just a draw. King f6, king e6, king e4, just equality. Fokhotynashvili probably had just seconds here, and she decided to take the bishop. But this endgame is very unpleasant for white, I think, because black king feels just a perfect here, and white king has a huge headache for the rest of the game. It's not also pawn structure is very ugly for white because there are a lot of weaknesses. King g2, rook a4, rook f7, and here it was the moment when Arabidze again could win the game. Well, maybe not win, but to get decisive advantage by playing queen d6, because this move actually protects everything here and attacks a3, and there's no real defense for this pawn. Well, instead of this move, Arabidze played queen b2 check, then queen a1, rook f1, queen a5. I don't know, she lost the thread, she lost the direction here, and Fokhotynashvili decided to not repeat this move. Maybe she saw queen d6, and she decided to go for another line, rook c1, pressuring from here. And I believe that in case of, well, in case of queen d6, I wanted to say that there is a rook c3, but also should be calculated just rook c6, trying this counterattack here on the king side. So it's not the same already for black. Rook a5, rook c6, and here Arabidze decided that, okay, let's make a draw. And she takes on d5, pawns are exchanged, and of course it's a drawish position. Well, to be honest, there was already nothing there in the position, so it's after the move rook c6, it's quite reasonable result. So it was a very interesting battle against two strong Georgian grandmasters, and the last game for today is game between Bodnaruk and Danielian. It was a very interesting game in the Caro-Kann. e4, c6, d4, d5, e5, this advanced line, bishop f5, knight f3, e6. The girls are going for the most, one of the most popular lines of the nowadays. h6, knight d2, knight e7, and this g5 move. Okay, there was a time when g5 move was already forgotten, but during last tournaments, it's a fashion line. The latest game that was played on this subject is game of Anand against Giri. When Anand played knight e1, this is a typical maneuver for nowadays. Knight tries to go to d3 to restrict this c5 advance, and from another hand, white tries to advance f4 and pressure the king side. Well, Giri played queen c7. Here the regular move, as we mentioned, is knight d3. Anand prepared some new idea, probably, bishop h5. Giri striked in the center. c3, Anand tries to hold on this pawn chain, that's quite logical. Bishop g7, because if this pawn chain will stay here, the black pieces, at least this bishop and the knight, are quite passive. and f4. c4. Unfortunately, this knight has to travel a lot, but sometimes happens. Knight d2. Pawn takes f4. Knight d3. Knight df3. So Anand's idea that he wants to recover this pawn slightly later and then pressure against destroyed kingside. Now Giri played knight g6, that is absolutely playable actually. But for some Caro-Kann players, I could offer also some improvement, a new idea, something like queen b6. It's quite unpleasant move because black pressures b2 pawn, and also there are motivations of knight takes e5 to use the pin of the d4 pawn. So it's quite reasonable alternative to the knight g6. Bishop takes g6, pawn takes g6, knight h4, and well, Anand got some advantage in the game and almost win it, but definitely there also black's game possibly could be improved. Anyway, in our game, Bodnaruk played bishop d2 instead of this typical standard maneuver 91, 93. So bishop d2 is not a novelty, of course, but nowadays almost nobody plays it. It was popular in 2013, 2012. However, nobody demonstrated how to get equal position with black after bishop d2. In the game, Danielian played a5. Okay, there was another game when black decided to go immediately for knight g6. It's a game Kostenjuk against Hotenashvili. White started again this typical maneuver, 91, knight f4 was played, bishop takes, pawn takes, and now Kostenjuk played knight d3. But I don't like this move. Let's say after queen g5, queen d2, black has to take this knight, otherwise pawn f4 will be lost. Queen d3. I believe that black doesn't have a serious problem in this position. Hotenashvili didn't find the best way to play here because she started to push this pawn, but okay, white can play a3, bishop f3, and what? And what? There's no real progress from it. So I think instead of wasting time for this pawn advance that could be made just on the later stage, I could recommend to black some improvement like castle. And for example, if white plays this solid bishop f3, already broke the center. Black has no problems here. Because actually this is the main problem, right? We want to activate our knight, activate our bishop, get some new squares there. So this is more reasonable, more logical than just quick h5, h4 that could be stopped by a simple h3. Anyway, I could offer also some improvement to the white players. Instead of Kostenjuk's knight d3, it's interesting to try bishop d3, because I want to keep this knight in order to pressure pawn f4. Anyway, I don't guarantee here any advantage to white, maybe just a slightly better position. Some more analysis are required. For example, bishop g5, pawn takes, queen takes, knight d3, h5, queen f3, bishop h4. Black just came in time to protect pawn f4, but the structure, I believe that it's clearly better for white, the pawn structure. a4, castle, a5, a6, it's not necessary absolutely, it's not forced, what I'm showing, it's just an example. And only way for the activity for black is to double here the rooks and attack g2 pawn. Sometimes something similar happens also in the Sicilian when white makes a castle alongside, and black enters into the c4 with the knight. White takes that knight, black takes that knight with the b5 pawn, and suddenly b5 is open for black. It's very similar, but now g5 is open. So we could react in a Sicilian style here. King h1, rook g8, okay, make some useful moves, and when doubling of the rooks is coming already, just rook g1, and problem is solved. Rook d8, rook a1, a1. I didn't find here how black can progress. H4, h3, okay. But white can try to progress here. For example, he could play h3, queen e2, knight d2, knight f3, b3, c4. I don't know. Maybe it's not enough to win the game, but I believe that after this novelty, bishop d3, white could prepare for a slightly better position. Anyway, let's go back to the game. And Daniel Liam played here a5 instead of knight g6. Knight plays logical move a4, bishop g7, and anyway this maneuver. Because anyway, without this maneuver, it's impossible to play with white, because our pawn chain is very restricted. Okay, here it's blocked, so we need something to open, to breathe. So knight e1 to open the way for the f pawn and bring into the game rook, bishop, and some other pieces too. And Danielian now plays queen c7, and maybe this was a novelty because I didn't see this move before. I know that there were played c5 in a few games. I think one of the main game was Volokitin against Iordachescu, and Iordachescu also could not equalize here with black. White has a very strong move, bishop b5 here, knight c6, c3, again trying to keep this pawn chain that limits a lot like minor pieces. c4, knight c1, knight a7 was played in game Volokitin Iordachescu, bishop takes d7, a little bit surprising exchange, but there was no other option because bishop was tagged there, and knight e2. And black didn't equalize because suddenly white knights are coming on the king side, then f4, and white is developing some pressure here. So Danielian tried queen c7, but I think it's also not very strong continuation because white has a clearly better position. f4, maybe first knight d3 also was interesting order of the moves. Anyway, pawn takes and knight d3. Of course, white doesn't hurry to take it with the bishop if it's possible. White would take here with the knight and then knight g5. Really very nice square. Danielian decided to play rook g8 here. Well, I perfectly understand that she was afraid to castle on the king side because all white pieces are coming there, and it's reasonably dangerous, of course. So, what else? I don't know what else. Maybe rook g8 is quite logical continuation. Maybe I thought even about f3 move here to disorganize a little bit white's pieces, but rook takes f3, bishop e4, rook f2, knight f5, and what black got? Okay, not a huge thing, right? Bishop goes anyway on h5, and white is the side who's pressuring here. So okay, let's follow just the game rook g8, and here Bodnaruk played prophylaxis king h1. The move cannot be a bad move, definitely, I agree, but I don't see the reason to make this prophylaxis so far. I would play knight takes f4. Also important is that for any case, knight even is protecting pawn g2, so nothing happens here. So really, I don't see the reason for such an early prophylaxis king h1. And then white plans to play bishop h5 and to play same style that in the game. Clearly advantage. So king h1, and here Danielian played bishop f4. Maybe it was interesting to destroy the center because without this move it's difficult to play on because uh, black is just playing without those minor pieces. Anyway, now knight takes, knight takes, knight takes, bishop e5, maybe check, king d8, pawn takes, queen takes. How do you evaluate this position? Very complicated play. Maybe white needs to find here some energetic continuations. But after first look, it's easy to say that even here white has a clear initiative because of pair of bishops, and black king is in much more trouble than the white one. Well, this evaluation also confirms the computer too, of course. So bishop e4, knight takes f4, knight f5, and here Badnaruk played very logical bishop h5 that I believe I also probably would play this move, and many grandmasters I believe. However, it was even more tricky to exchange this powerful bishop because probably this is much more serious problem for white than this problem for black. Bishop d3 could offer more advantage to white, superior advantage than after bishop h5, and much more calm play. Let's say bishop d3, pawn takes. Uh, well, black cannot castle long because pawn is hanging. If he will play b6, then just rook c1, and even knight d5 is the threat, because pawn c cannot take. When pawn e takes, knight f5 is hanging. Problems for black. And in order of knight f8, I can just even continue very optimistic g4 and knight h5. And white controls all the key squares, all the key lines. So it's almost near to the decisive advantage to white. And it's very easy to live with white king here when there is no powerful bishop in the center. Okay, let's go back to the game. Bishop h5, of course, is absolutely acceptable move. Danielian played bishop h8, and now very surprising move to me, knight takes e6. I really don't see the reason why white has to complicate so much the position, and why we have to let black take on g2. Much more stronger was simply queen e2, then even just maybe rook e1, at some point maybe rook f2, and to keep these opportunities and tactical strikes for the later stage of the game, because black is even just like in a zugzwang, because knight e6 is always hanging. I cannot castle. Rook just went to g8 to pressure here g2. If rook f8 will be done, there is no any pressure, and again knight takes e6 is coming. So even castle longside anyway will not be possible, not only for the reason of the bishop e7, but also pawn a5 is hanging. It's very difficult to recommend something to black here. So it was not necessary to take on e6 immediately. So bishop takes g2. Now position becomes very complicated and just crazy position, and probably it was very emotional game because now I guess already both of the players have something like 5 or 6 minutes. So it's such a huge complications here, and how to deal with them with such a little time on the clock. It's just impossible, it's just crazy high tension. So now Danielian needed to decide where to go with the queen, and she decided to go to the b6. However, maybe it was very interesting, tricky move queen b8, but once again, uh, it's impossible to find such deep details here with the 5 minutes on the clock. Okay, I even don't pretend that somebody should find it. So the idea is that probably white is planning to play king e1 to somehow place king on the normal position and keep pressuring here again. But the matter is that if now king e1 will be played, actually the point of queen b8 starts working. Why? Bishop takes e5, pawn takes e5, and queen takes e5, then it's just winning for black, right? So probably after queen b8, white should be forced to play rook g1 instead of king e1. And rook g1, queen g1, just knight e7, knight c5, knight takes, bishop c2. Black is doing just okay here. But anyway, I don't want to say that queen b6 was a serious mistake. It's also playable. Just now king e1 is possible, then there's no sacrifice here, and queen coming on e5. And now, after king e5, Danielian anyway takes the pawn on e5. That I think it's a little bit emotional decision because of the time trouble, of course, because it's very tough to find the correct ways here. However, I think, and my computer also thinks, that the best way was c5. Now after knight takes, knight takes, knight takes, knight takes d4, bishop takes e7, king e7, knight takes e4, pawn takes e4. It's about dynamical equality. Okay, white takes a lot of material, well, not a lot of material finally, just the exchange up, but the piece activity is very, very weak, very, very bad for white. So I would fear here more for the white's position than for the black's one. However, white has to bring the rook into the game, and there are a lot of possibilities. I'm just showing one of the possible variation that finishes with the draw. Check, check, and repeating. Because I cannot take this e4 pawn, because why? It will finish with the checkmate, of course. Well, this is once again showing how complicated is the game. So black took on e5, pawn takes, bishop takes. But actually, if here Bodnaruk would just simply play knight e c5, going back with the knight and trying to consolidate the situation, she would get decisive advantage. But instead of knight e c5, somehow she decided to go knight b c5. But the problem is that now those knights are hanging. Danielian played king e7, and suddenly both of them needs attention now. Queen takes, bishop takes f7, even more increasing the crazy complications here. And now Danielian reacts really very well. Instead of taking and losing the game, because now white queen would enter into the game with the checks. And game is finishing. She plays rook g2, activating his own pieces, and white king already is listening the breathing of the black pieces there, especially the rook that restricted here a lot. Everybody, white pieces, white king. But Naruk in time trouble finds also the great answer, and she brings the rook into the game, the new resource to defend the position. Really very high quality moves in a time trouble. Knight e4 was much more weaker because after pawn takes there are some serious threats and probably black will win here. So rook a3. Bishop takes h2. Very good decision, because it's not about taking the pawn, it's about getting access over g3 square, and this check could become very serious threat at some point for the white king. And now Bodnaruk makes mistake that it's not surprising, of course, because in such a complicated position with the time trouble it's easy to make a mistake. So she played queen c1. Instead of queen c1, she should continue the plan of rook activation, bring the rook on h3 and threaten at some point to this bishop, because probably this is the bishop that really creates serious threats to white king. Okay, if now bishop d3 check, of course this bishop will be immediately exchanged, and white pieces are demonstrating some serious activity, especially if the queen will enter now into the game somehow from here or any other square. Maybe black king will be checkmated immediately. So better to take on b2, knight takes e4. Now if black takes it, again it's too much material advantage for the white side, but queen e5 saves the game. Very crazy position. Now, okay, I want to take it with the queen, and also I'm protecting knight f5. Queen f3, check. Queen d1, queen e5. This is the funny draw that would be reasonable result of the game according to this position. But as we mentioned, Bodnaruk played queen c1, that was much more weaker. But Danielian also makes a mistake here. Answers was the same, just knight d4. Here black had just a crazy opportunity. I don't know if it's possible to find if you are not a computer. Rook f8. And the reason is that after rook b3, I'm just giving the queen and take the bishop. Knight f4 and simply knight g3. So now for this moment black just have only the rook for the king, but let's compare the piece activity. Black is dominating, and I don't want to say that black is winning, but white has a serious problems and black has advantage. Maybe somehow queen will find a way to give some checks, perpetual, save the game, but for now it's a very tough position for white. Well, after rook f8, if white takes this rook, then this blocking structure of the white knights is destroyed, and queen takes on c5, and um, black has a nearly winning position now. Because especially it's important that I will take also one of those pieces, and finally black will be left just with exchange down. Actually, uh, minor piece, knight or the bishop, and the two pawns for the rook with the king in the center. So it should be just winning for black. But of course, it's logical that Danielian was not able to find this rook f8 move, this crazy move, and she just played knight d4. Knight takes d4. Maybe it was better first to exchange here and then to exchange here, because as more pieces white will sweep from the board, much easier would be defensive task for the king. Okay, knight takes d4, queen takes c5, and now Bodnaruk makes decisive, well, not decisive mistake, but a huge mistake that could cost the game. She just played bishop e3, but the problem is that this is not the correct way to protect the knight. After bishop e3, rook is closed, and suddenly Danielian could play check, king d1, and now bishop c4, attacking the rook. It's very important check to win the tempo with the queen c4, with the rook attack. And now black is winning. She has absolutely winning position. If rook h1, it's a checkmate in a two moves. And if rook e1, okay, just bishop takes, king takes f7, and black took finally too much material. So instead of playing bishop e3, Bodnaruk should find knight e2 and just keep protecting those squares. I don't know the correct evaluation of this position. Black keeps attacking, and definitely there is dangerous initiative, but white is not losing, at least immediately. But after bishop e3, probably in the time trouble, Danielian also lost about this option, and she played immediately queen c4 instead of giving this intermediate check. Now rook is not under the attack, and Bodnaruk uses this moment for bishop f2, and again this diagonal is protected. However, black still has a very strong position, very good position, and nearly decisive initiative. All she needed to do is just to take this bishop, be brave, and there are no any dangerous open checks, and black is just winning. Even after queen h6, it looks like, wow, something bad will happen, but black calmly plays rook e8, and now open checks are threatening actually to white king. But Danielian makes one more mistake, rook f8, and suddenly, finally, white queen that was standing here on d1 and on c1 after for so long enters into the game, and white immediately gets decisive attack, because together with the queen and those checks, suddenly this defensive bishop also enters into the attack, and there are no way to save game with black. After rook f7, bishop check, queen e6, black resigned because of the checkmate. Very nervous game, very emotional, huge tension, and of course very interesting. Well, I hope you liked my first review of interesting games. I'm also planning to make some review about FIDE Grand Prix, and hope to see you soon. Thank you for attention. Bye bye.